Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
I told you my dad never had a dad, and he never said, hey, son, when you have a kid, just remember when you have a child who's terminal, here's how you deal with that. I mean, the pastors at the church don't even know how to do that. And so here I am stuck. And that's why, Dave, I really hope that these conversations can really blossom out there to new dads. Maybe even today, maybe there's a new dad that we don't even know about. And in 6 or 8 weeks, whenever this plays, he'll hear this and you and I can high five each other.
That's David Hirsch's guest this week, Scott Newport, an advocate for those touched with disability and special needs. Scott has had 3 children, including Evan, who sadly passed away at age 7 after fighting Noonan syndrome. We'll hear how Scott dealt with this tragic loss and went on to help others on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Say hello to David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
And now let's hear this heartfelt conversation between Scott Newport and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Scott Newport of Royal Oak, Michigan, who's the father of 3, a carpenter by trade, and an outspoken advocate for those touched by disability and special needs. Scott, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Well, Dave, man, it's really great to be here. I'm thinking back the first time we met and we were able to talk a little bit and find out the cool stuff you were doing and affecting dads all over the country here in the United States and maybe probably all over the world. And so it's a real honor to be with you today. And hopefully I'll have a few great things and tips to give dad and to maybe even learn more about myself as I recall some of the stories from my past.
You and your former wife, Penny, are the proud parents of 3 children, Chelsea, 32, Noah, 22, and Evan, who sadly passed away in 2009 at age 7 after battling Noonan syndrome, a rare genetic disorder. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Holy smokes. Well, that's going way back, Dave. I grew up in Ferndale, Michigan, which is near 8 Mile, which is a iconic road here in Michigan. And so I was a mile from Detroit. And like the kids today who play on their computers and do all the soccer stuff and the baseball stuff, we were street kids. And even though it wasn't a bad neighborhood, everything was about the neighborhood, the pickup softball games or baseball games against the next street over. You know, all ages hung out together, might be a 7-year-old and a 13-year-old and maybe even an 18-year-old. But it was really great. But a lot of it was just the neighborhood. People say, well, what kind of toys did you have when you were growing up? So I don't know. It was all about the neighborhood. You know, we played baseball in the street. We went up to the park. We lived near the Detroit Zoo. So in the summertime, that was our fun. It was free back then. We would go up there maybe for a week at a time. And of course, the security people would say, oh, no, here come the townies, you know. So that was part of my growing up.
Excellent. From what I remember, you were the middle child. You had an older brother and a younger sister. And I'm wondering if you still keep in contact with them.
Yep. My older brother is, even though we're still got that old sibling rivalry, we do keep in contact. He's out of the state right now. And he was kind of in the building business like I am, but he was in sales. And my sister is about a couple and a half hours away in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And occasionally I'll go over there, or quite often really, because they're by the lake, and we do connect quite a bit.
Excellent. So I'm sort of curious to know, what did your dad do for a living?
Well, heck, my dad was a carpenter too, but he was more of a builder than I was. I'm more of a carpenter, not a builder. So I learned a lot more of the technical stuff. He was more at getting jobs. And again, grew up in the city, I guess lower middle income, maybe you could say, but it wasn't like it is today where the dads go to all this, every soccer game, every this and that. My dad had to work. And so even though some of the other kids would join Cub Scouts and some of the other things, we never did that. I guess we didn't have the money. I don't even remember now, but it didn't even affect me because I didn't even know any different. But when it came to, snowmobiling, that type of things, we would always go. He would always take us, me and my brother. When I was in high school, I played a lot of sports, and my mom and dad, I don't think ever missed a game.
Okay, so sounds like he had a good work ethic and he was present. And I'm wondering, how would you describe your relationship with your dad?
So I would describe my relationship with my dad as close, but much closer as he got older, because as he got older and retired, I started to take him to work with me just about every day that he was here in this area with me. So it was a great relationship. He was a great storyteller and never really said, I love you, but he always showed that he loved me. Like if I told him I was going to come pick him up, like, man, yeah, come get me. And in fact, the day that he died, I took him to the doctor's office. He was kind of half in, half out, been struggling, and just came back from Florida. And my mom didn't want to take him, so I took my dad to the doctor's office that day. And as we got out of my work van, I said, hey, Dad, just so you know, there's no work today. And he looked over to me and he says, you're kidding, we're not going to work. And he laughed. He died like 20 hours after that. Oh, so I really thought that gave me a lot of peace, Dave, that my dad could even be kind of almost comatose, in and out, but I was able to joke. And that's kind of the relationship that we had. It was kind of, it was my dad, but it was kind of that good old boy thing, he was from Paducah, Kentucky, kind of the southern way. And so, yeah, that's a great memory.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. And I know men, our dad's generation, didn't verbalize themselves as much as maybe dads do or men are expected to today. But it sounds like he showed you maybe by his example that he cared for you, that he loved you, even though you might not have heard those words. That's what I heard you say. Is there an important lesson or takeaway, something you've tried to incorporate into your own fathering that you took away from your dad?
Great question, Davis. I kind of forgot about that. Now that you're getting me reminiscing about all these memories, I remember the first time I got a car, or I wanted a car. I said, hey, Dad, can I get this car? It's $600, I think, back then. And he goes, sure. And I said, but I need half the money. If I come up with half, will you come up with half? He agreed to that. So it was great. Well, first thing I did, I got the car and it needed brakes. Right? It was a cheap car. And I told my dad, and he says, your brakes are bad, dude. And again, he said, I'll help you do the right side, but the left side of the car is on your own. And I've done that with my son, Noah, like changing tires. Okay, I'll help you change one, but I'm not going to change it and bail you out every time. So he never taught me this thing, but I have kind of a motto that I had when my other son, Evan, was born: fortitude vincimus, and it means by endurance we conquer. And I think with my dad is like, yeah, we weren't really, really great at anything, but we got through everything together.
I love it. And I think that splitting the cost of things, with your kids as they're growing up and helping them, understand that the real world, there's costs to doing things and making it a little bit easier. And I think when people have skin in the game, that's what I heard you saying is that, if you've got an expense, right, instead of, expecting your parents to do things for you, you're going to have to, understand that there's a cost to life. I think it's a great way to help our youth transition from being young and maybe inexperienced to the real world. At least that's the way I think about it.
Absolutely. I can remember another time I was underneath that same car that I paid $600 for, that he paid $300. Like you said, I had a stake in it, $300, and the exhaust went bad. And so I was underneath that car. It was old Mercury Capri, I think. And I was using pop cans to fix the exhaust. He must have come out and looked underneath there, and he probably walked back in the house, didn't know what I was putting them pop cans on there, and they used to have that old exhaust tape, kind of a metal tape. And he finally came out and he says, here's $120. Why don't you go down and buy a whole new exhaust system? I can't watch this anymore. It's all great memories, right? Yeah.
So you've been in the construction remodeling business, and from what I remember, you've also taken up building furniture. And I'm wondering, how's that transpired?
Well, that's a great question. So, yes, I am a carpenter, right? But my dad never built furniture. And when my son Evan was born, and he had been in the intensive care unit for about 3 months, I noticed all these other doctors, a lot of them men, helping our family. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was so thankful that they would help the carpenter dude, right, who didn't have a lot of money. They would come beside me and my family to keep my son Evan alive. And I said, man, I got to thank him. So one day I went home after the hospital and thought I'd make him something. And I didn't have any really good wood around. And I thought, well, what could everyone use? I thought, well, I'll make him a stool. Everyone can use a stool. So I'll make the one doctor a stool. So I just finished building a staircase, and there was one tread in the staircase that had a knot in it. And the customer would never accept it. So it was a kind of a damaged piece of junk, right? So I took that step and I cut the top out of it. And I had some other scrap pieces that I actually had in my garbage can. I pulled those out and I was able to make 4 legs and a top. And I go, oh, this is pretty cool. He'll never know that it was out of the garbage. So I took it to the hospital. About a week later, I had it all finished. And I said, hey, doctor, Bob or whoever it was, hey, can we talk? I made you something. And as I was presenting to him, I started to think about my son, Evan, right? He had a heart defect. He had Noonan syndrome. Kind of like a throwaway, right? Nobody wants a kid like that. And I started to cry and he started to cry. And that's where it all started, where I started finding the beauty in the brokenness, right? And especially our kids with special health care needs and disabilities. And I ended up making one for all of the attendings, which was about 7 there at Beaumont Hospital here in Royal Oak, Michigan. And even the President of the United States has one of my pieces made for him. So it's really become kind of one of my missions and ministries in life. And it actually has made me a better carpenter too.
I love that story. Thank you for sharing. And I don't want to step on a landmine, but you've been married and divorced for about 8 years now. And I know that you have a older daughter from a previous relationship, and then you had the 2 boys with Penny. And I'm wondering if the challenges of raising a child with special needs had an impact on your relationship, or if it was beyond that.
Yeah, Dave, that's not a landmine. That's, we're men. We go through these things every day. And I do appreciate you being sincere and kind of considerate with me about that subject. But it did affect our marriage, the stress that it had when Evan was alive. And even before Evan was alive, all the ultrasounds and those things getting worse and worse news. And finally, Evan being born, and about an hour before Evan was delivered, they told us, by the way, is a 50-50 chance Evan would survive. So immediately, there's just big stress on the family. And we spent, almost a year in the hospital with Evan, not sure if he was making it. And she would talk to her friends about these things. And as a dad, I was terrified, right? How can I let this, because I was the protector, right? I'm the man. I'm supposed to fix things, and I couldn't fix this. And I remember the first time they had asked us to step out of the room because Evan was doing so poorly. It must have been a month or 2. And they thought I thought he was going to die. And they said, hey, you got to step out of the room. And I went out and I started freaking out. My wife was freaking out. We had friends there. But I walked to the bathroom that day. It was the staff bathroom as we were waiting to let back in the room. And I allowed myself to cry, or I just cried. And but I didn't tell my wife. But that was part of my coping mechanism. But during that whole time, there was just so much stress on our family, because once we were able to come home, we had full-time nursing. So we had a nurse in our house 24/7, and not sure how long Evan would live. So every night I would go to bed wondering if that would be the night. And I felt so much anguish because I had to go to work every day. My wife stayed at home. And if I came home during the day, I can still remember coming home one day when the teacher was coming over to the house, and I kicked off of work and I ran back to the house and she says, "What are you doing here?" And I go, "I want to see Evan with the teacher." She goes, "But you got to be making money, dude." And I'm going, "But my kid may not be here tomorrow. And if he's going to do something like pick up a block or say something, I want to be there." Right. And so that brought a lot of strain on our family, the finances. And people would say, "Yeah, but you had insurance, Scott." And I said, "Yeah, but I missed a lot of days of work, right? Every time he got admitted, I didn't go to work those days because I thought he might die. And it wasn't worth it to me." And so that financial stress and then people living in your house all the time. And then when Evan did eventually die, it just was never the same. I grieved so horribly. I didn't know how to react. I learned what depression was and was able to recognize that. So over the years when I had it, at least I knew what that was. But my wife didn't really understand that. And I should have talked. I should have forced conversation, which I didn't. And I'll never forget the time she says, "Hey, the furniture thing we talked about, and I also do a lot of writing too that helps me to cope." She goes, "I hope someday you find someone who likes your writing and your furniture," right? And that really crushed me. And I don't think maybe that she really even disliked that, but I think she saw I found joy in that. Maybe I didn't find joy with her in that. I mean, as we all know, relationships are complicated. Now you throw in a kid who's got a terminal illness, and you have another son, Noah, who we're trying to keep life normal, which it wasn't normal. That there's a lot of stress, and I think now I've learned how to communicate a lot better and wish I would have known those things. But like I told you, my dad never had a dad, and he never said, "Hey, son, when you have a kid with special healthcare needs, or just remember when you have a child who's terminal, here's how you deal with that." I mean, the pastors at the church don't even know how to do that. And so here I am stuck. And that's why, Dave, I really hope that these conversations can really blossom out there to new dads. Maybe even today, maybe there's a new dad that we don't even know about. And in 6 or 8 weeks, whenever this plays, he'll hear this and you and I can high five each other.
Yeah, well, thank you for being so authentic and open about the circumstances. One of the things I heard you say, Scott, was that your way of grieving was different from Penny's way of grieving, and you found some solace in the furniture building and your writing. And I think what I've witnessed in other situations is that men and women, fathers and mothers, don't grieve at the same pace and in the same way. And what we need to do is provide each other with some grace and space to go through that grieving process and just acknowledge that it's different. And it's not meant to be, that we have to go through the same situation at the same pace. And maybe that's one of the pieces of wisdom that you've taken away from your own situation as well.
Yeah, that was a great piece of wisdom because as we talked about before, and I tell you, I mentor families at the hospital with children with terminal illnesses. One of the first things I'll say to as a dad, just so you know, men and women grieve differently. And a lot of them, that's a surprise to them. But it's just saying that to give them that understanding and for them to accept that that's okay, that goes a long ways.
So I'm sort of curious to know, how did Evan's diagnosis come about, and what was your first reaction, understanding of that?
Well, his official diagnosis came at about 6 months for the Noonan syndrome, and of course, I told the doctor he was probably wrong. So I guess I was unaccepting of that, even though I knew Evan was a really sick kid. When Evan was first born, I thought, oh, well, maybe we'll be out of here in a few months and he'll be normal. And then after about 3 months, I go, well, maybe he'll have a little disability and we'll be out of here in 6 months. And at some point, I had to come to the realization Evan may never get out of here and he will not live a long life. And so once I accepted that made it a lot easier. Now that took one doctor in particular who came up to me, and he happened to be a dad too, which I didn't know at the time. And he came up to me in the intensive care unit, and he was the director of the pediatric intensive care unit at C.S. Mott Children's Hospital at the University of Michigan. And he stood next to me one evening and he says, "Hey, Scott, I'm no different than you." And what I thought he meant was he liked to hunt and fish like I did, right? He liked Diet Coke. Him and I both like, "Hey, I'm no different than you." And I found out about 3 years later that he had a son die too. And so there's another guy, almost like a father figure too. We're talking about dads and grandfathers who came to my side and was able to tell me that in a very kind way. So when I did get the diagnosis and I had guys like Dr. Joe Custer by my side, it made it easier to at least have expectations that would happen at some point and that I wouldn't be alone in that journey.
Yeah, well, I think of the stories like the one you just related about the doctor coming alongside you and not maybe explaining what he meant. I'm like you is really important. It's like there's an angel in your presence. Right? You don't know it at the time, but you can look back on it and, it's a very profound experience. And we're very fortunate to have people like that show up in our lives. I'm wondering if there were some important decisions that you and Penny made early on during Evan's battle that you can look back and say, those are the things that, we got right, or we wouldn't have changed anything based on everything you know now.
Woo! Brings a little emotion to me right now because I'm thinking one of the first big decisions we had to make was to have Evan identified as a DNR. And we had to sit down in a little conference room. And for those of you who don't know what a DNR is, that's a do not resuscitate order. And what that means is to not do any big interventions on Evan. And maybe if he was really sick, it'd be time to let him just go. So we came up with, we would start IV antibiotics, but we wouldn't do any surgeries with him. And I think that was a great decision. And even though very, very, very difficult at the time, it saved Evan from a lot of suffering that could have come about. I remember the day after we signed that DNR, on the window to Evan's room in the pediatric intensive care unit, I wrote the letters vertically DNR, and it was like one of them acrostic things, and it said, "Do not retreat." And one of the attendings came up to me because I would play yo-yos at night. I was getting other parents to do projects up there on the floor. We would call hospital stationery, which I put the DNR on, which was a paper towel, and "do not retreat." And she goes, "Scott," she goes, a DNR is a serious thing. And I really love this other attending doctor. And I go, "Yeah, but is it okay if we just keep a little bit of hope?" And she nodded and says, "Yeah." So I still tell that story. Evan was a DNR, but it doesn't always mean do not resuscitate. Sometimes it means do not retreat.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. It is a pretty heavy topic, though. Most people don't cross that bridge until you're typically dealing with an elderly parent. And, you're the one that has the healthcare power of attorney. And, that's a heavy responsibility. So I don't know what that's like, being in the shoes, having to contemplate that, as a parent. But it is a heavy topic. And the fact that you could shed a little light or some levity into the situation, I think maybe takes the edge off of it all. That's what I heard you say. So I'm sort of curious to know what impact Evan's situation has had on his older siblings, on Noah or Chelsea for that matter.
That's another great question. After we had talked the other day, I called Noah and I said, "Hey, I was talking to David, this new guy I met, and we were going to do some cool stuff together." And I said, as a sibling, can you say something about it? And usually he doesn't really talk to me about those things, but I'll hear from the school teachers or other members of our community. He seems to be more comfortable to tell them about Evan's story. And I don't know he may not want to talk to me because it'll bring up such deep emotion, we'll be crying, or he doesn't want to see me cry. But he did say this. He said, Dad, he said, when Evan was here, Evan was on a ventilator, he was on a feeding pump, he had a G-tube, never ate by mouth. He looked funny. He was short. Evan was a lot of fun. He said, but Dad, that was normal to me, to have nurses living with me and their grandkids and the whole house and the alarms going off. He said, that was normal to me. He said, after Evan died, that was, abnormal for me. And it really struck me. I'm like, oh my gosh, it was just the complete opposite. But he grew up doing that. And really, it's almost a cool thing because it almost teaches him that things don't always go right. Divorce, right? Car breakdown, lose a job. That is normal, right? And as I told you before, he's in a medical program, or at least a pre-med. I'm not sure if he's going to go into nursing or be a PA or medicine, but that's affected his life greatly. And he's always been, even as a young kid, very empathetic with other children. And so playing football, he would just be the coaches loved him. He was a middle linebacker and he just didn't care. And I called my social worker one day and I go, oh my gosh, Linda, my palliative care social worker, I go, Noah's acting, he's hurting people. And she said to me, Scott, that's the way he's getting it out. And that's a good thing. So I thought that was cool. I was proud of him too, by the way.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. It affects everybody differently. And I think we're inclined to think about the positive things, especially looking back. You want to have good memories. But it's challenging, right? And you've had the difficult challenge in your life of having to bury Evan. And then there's the life during Evan's life and then, post Evan. And, it sounds like you both had a chance, you and Noah have had a chance to reflect on that. And I'm wondering if it's had much of an impact on Chelsea's life as well.
Yeah, Chelsea, was older, and living on her own during, that time period. But she'd always come over and help and, always wanted to be, if I wrote a story and she wasn't in it, boy, watch out, right? She's like that, just, she's still daddy's little girl, right? She wants to be all part of that. And so for her, she was in the medical field too. And not because of Evan, but that's what she chose. She was more of a helper because she was older and supportive. Hey, do you want me to watch Evan for a minute so you can run up to the store and, help suction him? So, it was definitely different because, Noah was only 4 years old when Evan was born, and he grew up with that, not knowing any different. And Chelsea was older and had her family. She was married and whatnot. So it was a little different dynamic. But she's even to this day, posting a lot of pictures with her and Evan as, the proud sister.
That's fabulous. Thank you for sharing. I'm sort of curious to know, were there any organizations that your family relied on or that Evan benefited from during his short life?
Well, absolutely. We had a lot of people come around our side. I think one of the most interesting ones is the day we got finally discharged after almost a year at the University of Michigan, bringing home Evan to die here at the house, knowing how long he would live. We had 2 nurses come with us. We had all our new equipment here. And I think it was the next day I go, well, if something happens, we don't have the ICU doctors here. We're going to have to call 911. And I don't know if that's going to be a good thing because 911 doesn't always know a lot about pediatrics. So I actually drove up to our local fire station and I went inside. Hey, I'm Scott and I got a kid who may die soon. Do you think you want to do like an in-service on our family because we may call you? They said, yeah, we'll send 2 firefighters over tomorrow and meet with you. So they came over. Well, that relationship lasted the whole life of Evan. And at Evan's funeral, the pallbearers were the firefighters.
Oh, wow.
And the fire truck led the procession to the cemetery. Well, after a couple months with them, they said, the firefighter's going to do a spaghetti fundraiser for Evan. And we're like, oh, okay, that's cool. And they do know how to make spaghetti. I'm not sure if they know how to do a fundraiser, but they raised $17,000 for us, which was awesome. Another time, I come home to see Noah. I got off work and I asked Penny, I said, hey, where's Noah? And he's up at the school. He'll be home in a minute. And she was kind of laughing. I go, what do you mean? And as I'm looking outside, here comes like the big ladder truck the firefighters have, and Noah's in the back seat. And they actually picked Noah up after school and brought him home. So our local firefighters were really helpful. Of course, we had Make-A-Wish too. They helped us. My wife Penny wrote the president one day, and the president wrote back or calls and said, hey, your wife wrote us a letter and you guys are invited to come to the White House. And so Make-A-Wish helped us to be able to go to the White House and meet the president of the United States and have a personal conversation with him, which was totally crazy, right? And I asked my wife, I write and I edit and all that. So I go, what did you say in that letter to have the staffer from the White House call us? Because I didn't even believe it at first. She goes, I don't remember. I threw it out, the extra copy.
I just want to timestamp that because I saw the photo that you'd shared, and the president of the United States that we're talking about is George W. Bush.
Yes.
Which is
it was so fun.
A crazy way to meet the president of the United States, but it's just a reminder that he's a human being. He's rock solid as far as his family values are concerned. And thanks for sharing that, and great that Make-A-Wish played a role in that as well.
Yeah.
Were there any other organizations that played an important role?
Yeah, there actually was one that really helped us out a lot. And it wasn't a nonprofit. It was Children's Special Healthcare of Michigan here. And it's a secondary insurance for families. So if your main provider doesn't pick it up, they pick up the rest. And it's only for certain diagnoses. And Evan was able to get that. Thanks to Matt Richardson and Children's Special Healthcare, it's just awesome. And even today, Matt will still call me and say, hey, we have a dad who's really suffering, and we want to know if it would be okay if we give him your number. So it's so beautiful. And it's just a legacy of Evan and children like him that I had to go through all that suffering and pain. And now, if I didn't, I couldn't help these families, right? Because anytime I talk to a dad, they never say, you don't get it. I don't even tell them my story, just the way I talk and understand them. But it all starts like with these other organizations, right? Sometimes like Children's Special Healthcare, which is actually a state agency, you wouldn't think do a great job, but there's people out there. You just have to search them out and build contacts and allies. And it makes it easy for all of us.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Very impactful. I know that one of the things that we talked about earlier was your writing, and I'm wondering, how did that come about? And I'm wondering if you might be able to share one or two of the stories. I know that you shared a number with me, and one of the ones that stuck was going through the grits.
Grit, yeah. So I started writing. I never wrote in my life. I can hardly read. And I was under so much stress, and I wanted to get my voice out there when I was in the intensive care unit, like the first month or so. And I heard a sermon one day, and it said, everything rises and falls on leadership. And I thought, some of these attendings are better than other ones. And so I took a little 3x5 card and I wrote, everything rises and falls on leadership. And I stuck it on Evan's crib. Well, sure enough, it didn't take 5 minutes. One nurse would walk by. What's that supposed to mean? Well, another nurse would walk by. That means something, doesn't it? And I thought, I made an impact, right? And then I started writing stories. So I wrote a story about why everything rises and falls on leadership. And I started putting them on my support page, Noonan's support page group. The funny thing now that I look back at them, it was a full page, but there were no paragraphs. It was just one big paragraph. Well, one day, after many women wrote me and said, dude, you got great stories, but you don't know how to write, I met a woman, Mir Haynes, who was an editor down in South Carolina, and she had a son with a disability. She said, dude, I can help you. And so even to this day, she edits for me. So she taught me how to write. And it was just, don't tell me Noah's down the basement yelling. Let Noah do it. So she said, use quote, hey, Dad, I'm down the basement. Could you come down here? And I thought, when I used the quotation marks, I thought I could actually hear Noah down the basement. And other people could hear that too. So she started teaching me how to write, and I started going into writing conferences. And one day I told Mayor Haynes, I said, hey, there's a contest or the chicken soup for the souls looking stuff. She said, well, use that one story you wrote and maybe we can get it in. Well, I sent them like 7 stories and actually had 5 of them accepted. 2 of those were in one of their books. I've written for them 5 times since. And one of my favorite stories is not only do I do the carpentry and the furniture building, I also started making knives and creative stuff like that. And one day I said, Noah, we're both going to make a knife today. So we went out to my shop and we made knives and made the leather sheaths, and it was cool. And I thought, well, I could probably get better at this. And so I did. And one day another coworker of mine came up to me, and he was a hunting guy too. And he says, hey, I know you made that knife for me. Would you fix my buddy's hunting knife because I want to give it to him for Christmas? So I looked at the knife and I took it out to my shop that evening. And as I was going out to my shop, one of the dads I mentor, which I told you I mentor families with kids with terminal illnesses, and he was from Zeeland, Michigan, and he called me and they were in crisis. Their son was back in the hospital. They weren't sure if he was going to make it. And I said, okay, why don't you call me back in a little bit and we'll talk some more, see where things are going. So I went out there and I started working on the knife, and I was starting like at real heavy grits. He had bad scratches in that thing. I don't know who tried to sharpen it before. So I was 60 grit or 40 grit, then 60, then 80 and 120. And I kept doing it. And as I'm doing it, I'm thinking about that guy's knife and how special it might be. And maybe he got that for a Christmas gift years ago from his dad. I don't know. I'm thinking about this thing. But I was also thinking about the dad I was working with and thinking like, he's going to call me at 3 a.m. I've been working with him a long time, and I knew his kid was getting sicker and sicker. And I started to think, what would I say to him? And so I had my little, like one of those jeweler's lenses, and I had a light on my head, and I'm looking under the mic. I'm going, man, I can't get all these scratches out. And in an instant, it was like God said to me, Scott, maybe you should tell Ryan that we can't get all the scratches out. And maybe like the scratch my son had in him, the heart disease, and his son who had a brain deficiency, maybe we can't get all the scratches out. And I thought about that a little more, and I polished the knife and polished it. And I finally said, you know what, this knife looks pretty good actually, but I couldn't get that 2 big scratches out. And it reminded me more about Evan, and it reminded me about Ryan. And so the next day I told him that story. I said, dude, I'm doing this knife, and I don't know if it means anything to you, but maybe we just can't get all the scratches out. But that knife's pretty cool. And you know what? Your son is pretty cool. And God dang it, my son's pretty cool too. So we ended up writing that story, and I actually had that published in a pretty big medical journal called Voices from the Heart of Medicine. And that was probably one of my biggest accomplishments because that was out of a big college and a big medical university.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. What I love about your stories, your storytelling, is that you take some everyday experiences that you've had and you compare them, or you draw a comparison, an analogy, with life, right? And, one of the things that has been forefront in your mind is, this experience that you and your family have had with Evan, right? And realizing that, it's not right or not perfect, and coming to the realization that it's okay, right? That's just the way things are, right? And being accepting of that, as opposed to, discarding something because it's not as you would have hoped it to be. And there's a lot of enlightenment there. So I just want to say thanks for doing the writing that you've done, which you admitted earlier was therapeutic for you. But the fact that it can benefit so many others, right? To shed a light on, in some cases, a difficult issue or topic is really profound. I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering if there's any advice that you'd want to share with a dad who maybe has recently learned that he has a child with a difference or a special need.
Oh, Dave, you're hitting the jackpot now, dude. I mean, I'll tell one story when, and this is advice I give to a lot of families. I was in the hospital again, and I was starting to write, And I had to come to work one day, and on the way home, I heard something. I don't know if it was a sermon or a Christian song. And I pulled over on the side of the road, and I learned, as a writer, if you think about it, write it down. All I had was a McDonald's paper wrapper, right, a bag that I ripped open, and I wrote this thing down, and it had 3 points to it. Warriors know how to take on affliction. Warriors may get knocked down, but they always get back up. And the third one, which is most important, warriors know the greater the battle, the greater the reward, right? So I would give that thing to families as advice. You're a warrior. You have to learn about your child's condition. You need to know that you're going to get knocked down a few times while you're up here. And you know that the greater the battle, the greater the reward. And so if you're a spiritual guy, you can kind of think where like Christ came down too, right? So one day I was going to give that advice to a doctor. And he had gotten hurt and was in the ICU, and he had helped our families, but now he was out of it. So I went and told his wife about that. Here's my advice. Here's my little thing. Warriors know how to take on affliction. Warriors may get knocked down, and warriors know the greater the battle, the greater the reward. I walked out of that room 5 minutes later, went down the hall, and I heard someone running behind me. And I looked around, and it was the nurse. She said, "Hey, dude, I really love that. I mean, can I use that?" And I'm going, "Yeah, of course. Like, I'm great, right?" I came up with these 3 things. She goes, "Yeah, but you forgot the last one." I go, "No, there's 3." She goes, "No, you forgot the last one." I wasn't mad, but I was a little frustrated. I said, "Okay, nurse, what was it?" She goes, "Warriors never go into battle alone." Oh, God, what a miracle. Well, that's one of the advices I give a lot of families. And she was right. We can't do this alone. We need other dads around us. We need our families, our wives, the pastors at the church, children's special health care. We need our social workers. We need the teachers. I can't do this alone. I couldn't even teach my kid how to ride a bike, right? The social or the OTPT people had to do that, right? But it was cool to see.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. Very profound. And I think it dovetails into the whole existence of why the Special Fathers Network is here, right? So dads don't have to do it themselves. They can align themselves with somebody who's been there and done that, which leads me to asking, why is it that you've agreed to be a mentor father as part of the Special Fathers Network?
Well, it's like I was working with a dad last year, and first thing he told me was he was a ranger, right? And did I know what that meant? And I go, "Yeah, you're probably a pretty tough guy." He was a tough guy. And we really became close. And after we'd been meeting, we probably met, I don't know if it was 6 months before his daughter did end up dying up there. But one day I came in and he looked at me and he says, "How do you do this, man?" And I kind of knew what he was doing because I knew 2 kids had died on the unit the night before. And he was there, and when you're in an ICU, when other kids die or come in with a life flight helicopter, you know what's going on because everyone's rushing there. And he goes, 2 kids just died. Like, "Why do you come here and do this? Why do you do this, man?" And I said, and he caught me off guard because I never really thought about it. But I said, "Chase, I come up here every day to see you, or when I do, is because I don't want you to be alone. Because when I was here, 8 years ago, I was alone. There was no one for me. So with the network now, I want to be a mentor because I don't want any of these other guys to be alone because it's depressing. There's no hope. But when you have another guy come alongside you, just like Dr. Joe Custer came up to me and says, "I'm no different than you. Can you imagine me mentoring a dad in the network and standing next to him one day and going, 'Hey, dude, I'm no different than you.'"
Yeah, I love it.
Good stuff.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being part of the network. We're thrilled to have you. Let's give a special shout out to our mutual friend, Lisa Huckleberry at the Michigan Family Center for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs for helping connect us.
Way to go, Lisa.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Well, I know it's tough for everybody. It's not easy. It'll never be easy. But there's guys like me out there. There's people, but you have to look for them. Like if you think back to what I said, you can think all you want at night, buddy, like about how bad it is. But you need to start noticing the people around you. Remember I said sometimes noticing is more important than thinking. And I think that's probably a pretty good thing to end with because I'm still working on that and learning to listen to your spouse, that you guys don't have to think the same strategy, to understand those differences, try to become more reasonable, try to build partnerships with either your wife, your pastor, your buddy down the street. Be reasonable, but always be willing to ask the wondering question. "Hey, Hyundai, I'm just wondering, if we could do something different today, or ask the doctors or caregivers. I'm just wondering if we can do. So build partnerships, be reasonable, because we're in a big community, right? We can't always have our way, buddy, right? And be open to ask the wondering question.
Yep. Thank you for sharing. If somebody wants to learn more about the articles you've written or to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
I don't know. I guess you could Google my name. That's about. I don't have a website or anything. I just put it out there. You could probably search around a little bit and put my name or Evan's name. University of Michigan, C.S. Mott Children's Hospital. You can see some of the Big Hope Award that's named. There's an award at C.S. Mott Children's Hospital named after my son, the Evan Newport Hope Award. So any of those avenues, you might find some of the stuff I've written.
How about if we include your email? So if somebody wanted to follow up with you, they could do that.
Love to hear from any of you dads out there. I love doing it. So it's ScottHNewport, SCOTTH Newport @gmail.com.
Excellent.
And we'd love to hear from you.
We'll be sure to include that in the show notes. Scott, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Scott's just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Scott, thanks again.
Thank you, Dave.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.